Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome back to San Bernardino Zoo. It is a beautiful morning here in California, and we have got a big day ahead of us. We're going to be opening the zoo so that we can get enough money together to build the biggest exhibit I have ever built for 3 different species of tree frog. So the guests are on their way in. This guy here is just to get a few more people in. He's going to live in the entrance. This is where we got to last week, and to the left of the flamingo habitat is where we are going to build the tree frog pond. So if you've been part of our channel for a while, you know that I love an exhibit build. A lot of people hate them because they're just 4x4 boxes, but I love the challenge of taking those boxes and trying to build something cool with them. So the concept for this is we're going to have 6 exhibit boxes with 2 each of the red-eyed tree frog, golden poison frog, and layman's poison frog. They're going to live in a big natural-looking cliff with a waterfall, and then in front of it is going to be what I'm building here, which is a modernist style formal pool. And I think there's going to be a really cool contrast between the very formal looking pool and the much more natural looking cliff and waterfall behind it where the frogs are actually going to live. I came up with this method of using the curved wall pieces when we built a Galapagos tortoise habitat in Tekton Zoo, and I want to take that idea and take it to the next level with this build. So these pieces are really, really nice. It's pretty much the only sort of proper curves in the game that are perfect. When you make your own circles, they're always slightly imperfect, really. So they look really good, but the way they work on the grid, you can't really make any interesting patterns with them other than a circle. So what you do is you place them down and then you individually take each piece off the grid. So then you can move them into a much more interesting shape and they all fit together perfectly and look really nice. So the concept for this pool is that I want the walls to be really low, low enough that the guests could actually sit on them if you could get a bench that close to water in Planet Zoo. And then the water level is going to be really high, so it's almost touching the top of the walls. So we're going to put glass barriers all the way around, and in order to get the water where I want it to be, I've had to raise the terrain around where the pool is, which brings it closer to the next sort of meter step of how the water works in the game, so that we'll be able to get water almost touching the top of this wall and sitting in really nicely. Now, working with water in Planet Zoo always fun, as in not fun at all, and I did run into some issues here. When I was lowering each of the individual pieces of the glass barrier so that we could dip it into the wall so it can't be seen, there were 2 that just refused to move. I don't know what I was doing wrong. I don't know if there's any way to get rid of those. Maybe if I'd started the whole thing again I could have done, but I wasn't going to do that. But it actually forced me to put some more wall in to cover it up. I ended up really liking what I came up with because it enabled me to put a sign in. So it was one of those sort of accidental things where you end up with something better than what you'd originally designed. We're just going to drop all of these down below the level of the wall so that you can't see them. And you can see how close the water is to the top of the wall there. That's exactly how I want it to look. Really pleased with that. That's why I raised the terrain so that we could get the water up there. And while I do that, I just want to say a massive thank you for all the comments on the last episode. You guys really seem to like the slower building style that I did in the first episode. In fact, 100% of the comments that I got said they preferred that to the normal style. So I feel like I've accidentally invented a new way of doing speed builds, which I'm going to call slow builds from now on. And that is how we're going to do this whole series. So everything is going to be at this speed, and then I'll just edit out all the boring bits and just keep the interesting bits in so that you guys can see what I'm doing. So we're going to raise that middle section of wall now that I spoke about to cover up that bit of glass that just won't go away. And that is the basic shape of the pool. Now we're going to move on to the exhibits. So the natural looking cliff where the frogs are going to live is going to be a half circle behind this pond. And I want it to be nice and smooth. So what I'm going to do is build a half circle on the grid with these plaster pieces. And then we will position the exhibits exactly behind each one of the plaster panels. And then once we delete the plaster, we'll know that the exhibits are in a sort of perfect half circle. Well, it's not quite a half, it's like a third of a circle or something, but you get the idea. So we'll rotate these in place and line them up nicely. The one in the middle is going to be where the waterfall goes, and the waterfall piece in the game is 4 meters, same as the exhibit boxes, so that'll fit in there nicely. As I said earlier, we'll have 6 separate exhibit boxes, 2 for each species of frog, and we'll position those to match up with the circle that we just made. If you ever need to move an exhibit box with the advanced move tool like this, it's really weird how it works in the game, but when you click on the exhibit box, you've basically selected the exhibit so that you can make any adjustments to the inside and the humidity and everything else. And then if you click on the button that moves you up into the next group, you're then able to actually move the exhibit box, which is how you can get them to line up precisely if you ever need to build anything like this where you want it to be arranged in a really particular fashion. So we want to get them as close to each other as possible so they're touching, and then when we cover them all up with rocks, we're going to end up with just little windows into bits of each habitat rather than the giant 4x4 glass fronted box that you see here, and it'll look a lot more like the amphibian exhibits that you would normally see in a zoo. So that's the basic shape of the exhibits in. Let's move on and get all the rocks and the plants in and start making this look good. So this is the same pile of rocks from last week. I told you I always use this pile. We're going to have to do a lot more work on it this time to make it work with what we're trying to build here, but this will still form the basics of it. So we're going to build a big cliff. This will surround the exhibits and partially cover them, and then we'll do a load more little rocks to tie it all together. But we'll get the basics done first, so just cut this up into pieces and spin it round and get it so that it covers these boxes properly. Now, with this being my first attempt at a more realistic zoo, I have had a lot of questions about guest flow and planning and all the stuff that I'm probably not as good at. So I decided to employ the services of a consultant to make this zoo. So I want to give a big thank you to JP. If you've seen my tour of Rose Lake Zoo 1945 last year, you'll know all about how good JP is. He built that zoo. He's an amazing builder. So I've already fired loads of questions at him about pathing and guest flow and stuff like that, and I'm sure I'll have a load more for him. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to him for helping us out with building this zoo, for his sage words of advice. Let's get the waterfall in. This is going to be a sort of little mini centerpiece for the build. So we'll use the waterfall piece and then just recolor it and then get a load more rocks in to cover up the sides. We're also going to make the pool a more natural concrete color rather than the bright white that I normally use. I think that's going to make it sit in really nicely with the more natural looking cliff in the background. And we'll put some of these blue lotus flowers in as well. They look really nice there. And then it's time for the frogs. So we're going to get all three species of, well, I'm not sure if the poison frogs are also tree frogs or if they're completely separate, but we'll have the red-eyed tree frog and both species of poison frogs. 2 of the poison frogs first, then 2 of the red-eyed tree frogs, and then the layman's poison frog at the end. I always think the exhibits look better when you have more than just one of them. And we're just going to put a couple in, and with this being franchise mode, we'll let them breed. We'll turn on the amazing management system that you can use now, and they will slowly fill up, and then we'll start selling the excess frogs, and that's really going to help the zoo's finances. We're also going to fill in the gaps between the exhibits with rocks and mulch, so that when you look at it, each exhibit should look almost like it's just one large exhibit rather than 3 of them stuck next to each other. You'll still be able to see the glass, but that's fine in terms of having 2 different populations, and especially where you've got different species of frog. You're going to want to separate them anyway, but this will just give it a much more cohesive look. And then we're going to cover up this little gap in the path with some plaster, just so I've got a guide really to put a load of rocks in and get a nice smooth sort of semicircle there. And then that'll make that look a lot nicer. Don't want any visible gaps between the paths, obviously, anywhere in the zoo, so this will achieve that here. We'll do some more rock work and things like that to cover up any other gaps that we can't get rid of with the path tool. That's looking really nice now. I've just realised looking at this, I forgot to make custom signs for the frogs. I know they're only tiny, the exhibit ones, but I still want custom signs in there, so I'll make sure those are in for next week. That's the waterfall sorted. One more little touch is going to be some ivy on the joins between the exhibits, just to further sell the idea that those 2 there are joined together. And then it's on to the sign. I'm going to be using a lot of custom fonts in this zoo. I know Christina Triple Z has just released some amazing new ones, but for this particular sign I want a really solid 3D letter, because these are going to be like metal letters that are built into the concrete. So we're going to use Noto in the 3D version of it. and just place this around here so that it matches the curve of the concrete precisely, and then we'll rotate it into place and sink it into the wall and recolor it, and we've got a really sort of realistic looking sign, which I am very happy with when it's done. Let's just spin that round, move it across. Once it's in exactly the right place, we can recolor it and it'll really sit nicely into the concrete that's behind it. And there we go. Right, onto the planting. So I'm going to make one area of really natural looking sort of vines and hanging plants, all the kind of stuff that you want hanging off these rocks. I'm going to build it on a piece of plaster so we've got a nice flat area to work on. Just makes it way easier to put everything together. And then once I'm happy with this little bit, we can then copy that all around onto the rocks and then just adjust it as and when we need to, so that we can get a really natural covering for the whole rocks. That's looking pretty good. Let's move that over to the area that we want. There we go. And yeah, just loads and loads of these. You can see how the plaster makes it much easier to move it into the right place. And once we've got a couple of them in, then we can go in and delete the plasterboard at the back of each group of plants. We'll get a really natural look. So let's just delete that now. There we go. That's starting to look nice already. And then we'll put some larger plants in around the waterfall because we really want to highlight that area. As always, we'll be sinking ponytail palms into the scenery like we always do. And then it's on to the backstage. Yes, you heard me, we're actually going to have backstages in this zoo. Some of them will be completely detailed inside and out, and some of them will just be there on the outside, depending on what I need and whether keepers are actually going to be going in there or not. So for this one, we're just going to build the outside of it. The keepers sort the exhibits out from the front basically just by wiping them with a cloth. Even though I put paths in here, I've tested it and they never ever use them, so I'm not going to spend hours building the inside of the back of this habitat, but I do want it to have a visible backstage area where the keepers would look after the frogs. One of the things that always bothers me about the exhibits in this game is, how do the keepers get in? How do the animals get in? It's just a solid glass box. So by putting a back on the building, it then looks like all the access to the animals is from the back of it. So we're just going to put a nice semicircle on the back, and that will suffice, I think, to give us a realistic backstage look. And now it's time for the final stage of the build. So in order to sit this into the surrounding landscape, make it look realistic and make it look beautiful, we need to plant up the edges of the frog pool, so there's no sort of visible gap between the path and the pool, and it also just adds a nice splash of green to the area. So we're going to use the mulch, bring it all the way around the pool. Takes a bit of doing to get it to line up perfectly, but definitely worth the effort, I think. So we'll just use some of the circular pieces and some of the smaller pieces like this one, and just line them up until it's absolutely perfect. That's looking good. And then we'll start planting it up. So I'm going to use loads of different plants for this, not really paying a huge amount of attention, if I'm honest, to what species of plant it is, just stuff that looks like it would work in a border like this. So I try a load of different ones. We're going to have some varying heights, a little bit more height in the middle here, and there's also going to be a bench here for the guests to sit on. And then we'll have even more height in this part here, because it sort of makes sense next to the raised part of the concrete with a sign on it. I also need to cover up that big hole in the terrain there, which I couldn't get rid of. So we'll put a bit more of an extensive garden into this bit here. And then round the edges, we're just going to have some really low-lying plants just to fill that gap in. These are the Lords and Ladies plants from the Twilight Pack. They are really useful for stuff like this, because there's one that's basically just one tiny little plant, so I've put a few of them together into more of a substantial kind of shrub. We'll place that all around the borders, and that is the tree frogs done. I'll make a few more improvements off camera and then we'll take a look at it. Oh, that is lush. I really like how that looks. It's so good building in a map set in California rather than England for a change. You can get so much foliage in there. I think the frogs are going to be pretty happy in their new home as well. very pleased with how this has turned out. Thank you so much for watching, as always, guys. This is where we started today, and this is where we are now. I will see you again, hopefully next week, if I can get a move on, where we will look to complete the water terraces. See you then. Bye.